there's a moment in the twin flame journey that nobody prepares you for. It's when the feminine energy, after months or years of carrying the weight of the connection alone, begging for recognition, chasing signs of reciprocity, finally gets tired. It's not ordinary fatigue, the kind that goes away after a good night's sleep. It's soul weariness that's born from the profound realization that you're betraying your own essence by pleading for love from someone who should recognize you naturally. It's when the divine feminine awakens to its power. The true feminine power doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't shrink itself to fit into the narrow spaces others offer. True feminine power chooses, attracts, allows or denies, but never begs. And when this energy finally stops running after, when it decides to establish itself in its own sovereignty and inner wholeness, everything changes. Not just in the dynamic between the two people, but in the very energetic structure of the universe around them. The feminine is the original creative principle, the one that defines the magnetic fields of reality, and when it finally assumes its natural position, the masculine has no choice but to respond. If you're watching this video, then you've arrived at the most important turning point of your spiritual journey. Today I'm going to reveal why the divine feminine's exhaustion isn't defeat, it's the final phase, the awakening. Because the decision to stop chasing is the only strategy that can actually work in a twin flame connection. And most importantly, I'm going to teach you how to recognize whether you're operating from lack or abundance, because this difference determines everything. And if you stay until the end, you'll discover the secret Jung kept about the true function of twin flames. Because maybe the purpose of your journey was never to win over the other person, but to find yourself again. Carl Jung dedicated a large part of his work to trying to understand the energetic dynamics between feminine and masculine, not just between different people, but within each individual's psyche. And through clinical observation and deep study of alchemy and ancient mysteries, he reached a conclusion that contradicts everything modern culture teaches us about relationships. The feminine is the active creative principle, and the masculine is the reactive responding principle. This reversal of the common perception about active and passive is fundamental to understanding why so many twin flame connections fail when they operate in inverted energy. Patriarchal society has conditioned us to believe that masculine is active and feminine is passive, that men pursue and women wait, that taking initiative is a masculine function and being receptive is a feminine function. But Jung discovered exactly the opposite when it comes to deep energetic dynamics of the soul. The feminine principle, according to Jungian studies on anima and animus, is like a magnetic field that defines what's possible or impossible in reality. It's like the earth that chooses which seeds it will allow to germinate in its soil. The earth doesn't chase after seeds begging to be fertilized. It simply offers or denies the ideal conditions for life to flourish. And when it offers these conditions, the seeds naturally turn toward it, surrender to it, find in it the perfect environment to develop fully. The masculine principle, on the other hand, is like the sun that shines constantly with its authentic truth, offering its light consistently, but always responding to the magnetic field created by the feminine. When the earth is receptive, the sun pours over it with full intensity. When the earth closes off, the sun continues shining, but its energy directs itself to other places where it finds openness. Jung observed that when these principles operate in their natural functions, when each is aligned with its energetic essence, attraction happens organically, without effort, without resistance. But when roles reverse, when the feminine tries to be the sun by chasing, and the masculine tries to be the earth by resisting, the dynamic becomes forced, unbalanced, and almost always doomed to failure or unhealthy codependency. And this is where millions of people get completely lost. They confuse energetic polarity with physical gender, think that being feminine means being submissive or passive, when in reality, it means being the chooser and creator of realities. In twin flame dynamics, regardless of who's in a man's or woman's body, there's always one soul that carries predominantly feminine energy, and another that carries predominantly masculine energy in that specific connection. And Jung perceived something revolutionary. When two halves of the same soul recognize each other through different people, conscious union only becomes possible when each fully assumes their natural energetic polarity, without trying to force or reverse the roles the universe has designated for them. The problem is that modern society, through misunderstood feminist conditioning and distorted patriarchal culture, has taught exactly the opposite. It taught women to chase men, to be aggressive in conquest, to try to control outcomes through masculine strategies. And it taught men to be more passive, more receptive, less directed in their romantic advances. This polarity reversal has created entire generations of people who can no longer relate in energetically balanced ways. And when it comes to twin flames, this confusion becomes even more destructive. Jung extensively documented in his clinical sessions that couples who maintained deep and lasting relationships were always those where each person naturally honored their energetic polarity, and those who lived in hellish cycles of conflict, separation, and reunion were invariably those where polarities were confused or completely reversed. When it comes specifically to twin flames, Jung made an even more specific discovery. The soul that carries feminine energy in the dynamic is always the one that defines whether the union will materialize or not, regardless of being in a male or female body, regardless of appearing socially stronger or weaker. And here's the part that may sound controversial, but that Jung documented irrefutably: when the feminine chases, when it abandons its own wholeness to run after the masculine, when it tries to convince through rational arguments or emotional manipulation, the masculine automatically pulls back, not out of cruelty, not from lack of love, but because energetically it senses that the magnetic field is inverted, that something fundamental is out of natural order. On the other hand, when the feminine establishes itself in its own sovereignty, when it chooses itself as the primary source of love and wholeness, when it stops chasing and begins radiating its own authentic light, the masculine instantly feels this change and is naturally drawn, like bee to nectar, like river to ocean. This isn't manipulation or psychological games. It's an energetic law as natural as breathing. And when you understand and consciously operate with this law, the entire dynamic of your twin flame connection transforms, because you're finally navigating with the natural energetic current instead of desperately fighting against it. To understand how to apply this understanding practically, you first need to identify with absolute honesty which polarity you carry in your specific twin flame dynamic. And this doesn't always correspond to your physical gender or superficial personality characteristics. Jung developed precise ways to recognize energetic polarity by observing not what people did externally, but how they felt and reacted energetically to each other. If you carry feminine energy in the dynamic, you probably feel an attraction that's simultaneously magnetic and selective. You don't feel drawn to just anyone, but when you connect with your twin flame, the attraction is total, enveloping, as if every cell recognizes that energy. You may also feel an intense need for fusion, to dissolve boundaries, to become one person with them. And when they pull away or create distance, you feel as if an essential part of you is being torn away. If you're the feminine pole, you may tend to idealize your twin flame, see them as perfect, as the answer to all your deepest longings. You may feel incomplete without them, as if you need their presence to feel whole, and paradoxically, you may have intense impulses to care for them, heal them, save them from their own problems. But here's what's crucial to understand: these feelings and impulses aren't signs that you should act on them. Actually, they're clear indications that you need to do exactly the opposite. They're warnings that you're confusing your natural energetic function with behaviors conditioned by sick society. The true feminine doesn't chase, doesn't try to save, doesn't abandon itself to win over the other. The true feminine establishes itself in its own wholeness, and, from that place of absolute integrity, allows or denies the masculine's approach. Like the rose that doesn't run after bees, but simply blooms in its authentic beauty and allows them to come naturally to it. On the other hand, if you carry masculine energy in the dynamic, you probably feel a more focused, directed attraction. Like a laser beam pointed at this specific person, you may feel an unshakable certainty that they're the one, even when they're being inconsistent or confused regarding you. You may also feel natural impulses to protect them, be strong for them, create stability so they can flourish completely. If you're the masculine pole, you have more ease maintaining your individuality, even when deeply connected. You can love intensely, but don't lose your sense of identity in the process. And when the feminine pulls away or creates drama, you feel confused, but not destroyed. You manage to maintain a relatively stable emotional base, even during relational turbulence. Jung observed that the true masculine is naturally responsive to the feminine's energetic state. When she's established in her sovereignty, radiating in her own truth, he naturally feels attracted and compelled to approach, offer, court. But when she's chasing, needy, trying to convince, he instinctively pulls back, not from cruelty but because he senses something is energetically inverted. This masculine responsiveness isn't a flaw or cruelty. It's his natural energetic function. Like a compass that always points to magnetic north, the masculine always orients toward the feminine that's radiating its own authentic light. But when the feminine is running after him, it's as if magnetic north is constantly moving, making it impossible for the compass to find stable direction. And here we arrive at the central point of everything: why the feminine must stop first. Because stopping doesn't mean giving up or becoming indifferent. It means exactly the opposite. It means stopping moving in the other's direction and starting to move in your own direction. Jung perceived that the final stage of the twin flame journey always begins when the feminine makes a fundamental internal choice to choose itself as the primary source of love, wholeness, and fulfillment. Not as a strategy to win over the masculine, but as an authentic act of self-love and personal sovereignty. When the feminine stops emotionally abandoning itself in hopes of winning over the masculine, when it stops molding itself to be what it thinks he wants, when it stops sacrificing its own truth to maintain the connection, something extraordinary happens in the energetic field between them. The feminine begins radiating a completely different frequency, a frequency of conscious choice instead of desperate need, a frequency of internal abundance instead of emotional lack. And the masculine, which is naturally responsive to the energetic field created by the feminine, immediately feels this profound change. It's as if she lit a light that didn't exist before. It's as if she became magnetic in a way that wasn't possible when she was running after him. Jung documented this phenomenon in dozens of clinical cases, where people in obsessive dynamics with their supposed twin flames managed to completely transform these dynamics simply by changing their relationship with themselves. One of Jung's most striking patients spent 2 entire years chasing a man she believed was her twin flame. She changed her plans to be available when he wanted, suppressed her own opinions to not upset him, sacrificed friendships and personal interests to dedicate herself entirely to the connection with him. The more she did this, the more he pulled away, the more evasive and inconsistent he became in his demonstrations of interest. Jung worked with this woman for months, helping her understand that her obsession with external union was preventing her internal individuation. When she finally managed to establish herself in her own sovereignty, when she finally chose to prioritize her own growth instead of waiting for him, something remarkable happened. Within weeks, he began seeking her out, demonstrating genuine interest, behaving consistently and committedly. But here's the most important part of the story. When he finally approached with serious intentions, she discovered she no longer needed him in the same desperate way. She still felt love and attraction, but now she could consciously choose whether she wanted to be with him or not, instead of feeling she needed him to feel complete. This is the central paradox of the twin flame journey. You can only consciously attract what you don't desperately need. You can only magnetize what you can freely choose to receive or reject. When you need something or someone to feel complete, you emit a lack frequency that naturally repels what you most desire. But when you become complete through yourself, when you establish yourself in your own emotional and spiritual sovereignty, you emit an abundance frequency that naturally attracts experiences and people aligned with that elevated frequency. Jung called this the individuation process, becoming a complete and integrated individual who doesn't depend on external factors to feel whole. And he discovered that individuation is always prerequisite for conscious and healthy relationships, especially soul relationships like twin flame connections. When the feminine individuates, when it stops defining itself through the masculine's response and begins defining itself through its own internal truth, it automatically becomes more attractive. Not because it's using seduction strategies, but because it's radiating authentic integrity. And authentic integrity is magnetic in a way that emotional neediness can never be. The masculine, which previously pulled back from the energy of need and pursuit, now feels naturally attracted to the energy of choice and sovereignty. It feels it can approach without being sucked into a vortex of emotional dependency. It feels it can offer its love without that being interpreted as obligation to fill emotional voids that aren't its responsibility. But there's a very important nuance in this process that most people don't understand. When the feminine chooses itself first, it doesn't mean it becomes selfish or indifferent to the masculine. It means it becomes capable of loving maturely, instead of loving codependently. Mature love is the kind that comes from abundance, not lack. It's the kind that offers gifts instead of demanding debts. It's the kind that celebrates the other's individuality instead of trying to mold them to fill personal needs. And this type of love is only possible when you love yourself enough to not need others to fill voids that are your responsibility to fill. Jung observed that when two people relate from individuation, when each is complete in themselves and consciously chooses to share their wholeness with the other, they create what he called the union of opposites. Not fusion where identities dissolve, but synthesis where two integrities complement each other harmoniously. And this is exactly the final goal of the twin flame journey, not finding someone to complete you, but finding someone who's already complete like you, and consciously choosing to create something greater together. Like two talented artists who join to create a masterpiece that neither could create alone, but which is only possible because each already masters their individual art. But how exactly does this work in practice? How do you make this transition from pursuit to sovereignty? How do you stop chasing without becoming cold or indifferent? How do you choose yourself without closing your heart to the connection? These are practical questions that Jung addressed through specific inner work techniques. The first step is developing what Jung called the self-observation function, the ability to observe your own emotional and behavioral patterns without judgment. You need to start noticing when you're operating from lack versus when you're operating from abundance. Lack manifests as urgency, as need for immediate response, as tendency to interpret silence as rejection. Abundance manifests as natural patience, as ability to give space, as confidence that what's true always finds a way to manifest. The second step is learning to distinguish between love and attachment. Love is an expansive force that wants the best for the other regardless of how it affects you. Attachment is a possessive force that wants the other in a specific way to satisfy your needs. When you truly love, you can desire for the person to be happy even if it's not with you. When you're attached, you can only imagine their happiness if it includes you. The third step is developing a consistent practice of internal fulfillment. This means creating sources of joy, fulfillment, and love that don't depend on any specific person. It can be art, nature, spirituality, meaningful work, deep friendships, any activity that connects you with your own essence and makes you feel alive through yourself. The fourth step is learning to establish healthy energetic boundaries. This means stopping molding yourself to please, stopping suppressing your truth to avoid conflicts, stopping making yourself emotionally available to those who don't demonstrate consistent reciprocity. Not out of revenge or manipulation, but from basic self-respect. And the fifth step, perhaps most important, is cultivating an intimate and loving relationship with your own company. Learning to enjoy yourself alone, comfort yourself in difficult moments, celebrate yourself in victories, forgive yourself in mistakes. When you become your own best friend and dearest company, you stop desperately seeking these functions in other people. Jung understood this process doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey of months or even years, depending on how deep the codependency patterns you've developed throughout life are. But each small step in this direction changes your energetic frequency perceptibly, not just for you, but for all people around you. And here's where the real magic happens when you finally establish yourself in this inner sovereignty. When you stop chasing your twin flame and start living your own life fully, two things can happen. The first is they may awaken to what they lost and start chasing you with the same intensity you used to chase them. The second is, you may discover you no longer need them to feel complete. And this discovery opens space for even more evolved and mature connections. In both cases, you win. Either you reclaim your twin flame from a position of power and wholeness, creating solid foundation for truly conscious relationship, or you discover you're capable of attracting and sustaining connections even more aligned with who you've become through this growth process. But regardless of external outcome, the real prize is always internal. You reclaim your own soul. You stop living on the periphery of another person's life and become protagonist of your own story again. You stop begging for love crumbs and become inexhaustible source of love for yourself and the world. Jung said that the final goal of human existence isn't finding our other half, but becoming whole through ourselves. Twin flames, according to this perspective, don't come to complete us, but to awaken us to our own wholeness. Mutual recognition serves as mirror where each soul can see itself reflected in its totality. But the work of becoming that totality is always individual and non-transferable. When the divine feminine finally gets tired and decides to stop chasing, it's not giving up on love. It's finally choosing true love, starting with itself. It's deciding it deserves to be chosen by someone who recognizes it naturally, not by someone who needs to be convinced of its worth. It's opting to be magnetic through its own light, not needy through its own lack. And this choice, even when made in silence, within one's own heart, has power to transform not just your personal life, but the energetic dynamic of all people around you. Because when a person truly establishes themselves in their inner sovereignty, they become living inspiration that it's possible to love without losing yourself, connect without abandoning yourself, desire without becoming desperate. If you've made it this far and felt I was speaking directly to your soul about this dynamic you may have been living for months or years, then I need to tell you about resources I've created specifically to accelerate this transformation you need to make. I've developed 2 exclusive materials based on Carl Jung's deepest teachings on individuation and conscious relationships. The first is 21 Days of Transformation with Carl Jung, a practical guide that will take you through the most powerful techniques Jung developed for individuation and self-knowledge. For 21 days, you'll work with specific exercises to integrate your shadow, dialogue with your unconscious, and most importantly, establish yourself in your own emotional and spiritual sovereignty. It's like having Jung as your personal therapist, guiding you step by step through the process of becoming truly who you are. The second material is the Soul Survival Manual, because I know that when you're going through the intensity of a twin flame connection, some days are simply hard to get through. This manual contains practical strategies, based on depth psychology, to navigate the most challenging moments of the journey. These are tools you can use when the temptation to return to old pursuit patterns is very strong, when the need to control the situation seems unbearable, when you question whether you can really do this individuation work. The links are in the first pinned comment of this video. And now I want to know who really stayed until the end of this journey with me. Write in the comments I choose myself first, because that shows me you're not just another viewer, but someone truly committed to your transformation. Remember, only 5% of people on twin flame journeys manage to make this energetic polarity reversal. Not because it's impossible, but because it requires courage to go against everything society has taught us about love and relationships. You made it this far, because your soul knows you're capable of this transformation. The divine feminine within you is tired of begging for recognition. It's ready to occupy its natural position as creator of realities, as source of love, as magnetic force that attracts instead of chases. When you finally make this choice, when you finally stop running after and start establishing yourself in your own light, everything will change. Not because the external world will necessarily transform overnight, but because you'll become someone completely different. Someone who doesn't need to beg for love because they are love. Someone who doesn't need to chase connections because they're magnetic. Someone who doesn't need to complete themselves through others because they're already complete. And when you become that person, when you finally embody your own inner sovereignty, whatever is meant for you will find its way naturally. Whether it's your twin flames return with completely new awareness, whether it's the arrival of even more evolved connections, or simply the profound joy of living as protagonist of your own love story, starting with yourself. Thank you for having the courage to question patterns, seek truth even when it goes against your previous beliefs, and most importantly, for being willing to do the inner work necessary to live conscious and mature connections. See you in the next video.